She believed the worst thing in her life was trusting the wrong man. He
So,
lied to her, used her,
what do you
pulled her
think?
into something illegal and dangerous. The night she
So, what
escaped,
do you
she
think?
ran until her body gave up.
I think
No
it's
money,
lovely.
no family, no place to go. She collapsed on the side of the road, certain her life had finally reached its end. That was when strangers appeared. An elderly couple who didn't ask questions. A quiet house that felt safe. A woman who lived alone and welcomed her in. For the first time in years, Emily felt protected. She thought she had survived the nightmare. She didn't know she was only stepping into a much quieter
It's all
kind
right,
of danger.
darling.
The
Everything's
kind that
going to
doesn't
be
chase
okay.
you, doesn't threaten you. The kind that waits. Emily Carter grew up believing that loneliness was a permanent condition, not a passing phase. She never remembered a home filled with voices or a table crowded with people. Her childhood was marked by silence, by unanswered questions, and by a constant sense that she had been left behind by the world before she even had a chance to understand it. She learned early how to rely on herself, how to stay quiet, how to disappear into the background. So when Jason Miller entered her life, he felt like proof that things could change. Jason was attentive in the beginning. He listened when she spoke. He noticed small details about her, how she liked her coffee, how she avoided crowds, how she flinched at sudden noises. To Emily, his presence filled a space she had carried inside her for as long as she could remember. She told herself that love, real love, could rewrite her story, that it could replace the emptiness with belonging. She trusted him completely. Jason spoke often about opportunity, about money, about how unfair the system was to people like them. He said they deserved more than scraping by, more than surviving paycheck to paycheck. At first, the things he asked her to do seemed harmless, small favors, errands, paperwork she didn't fully understand. Emily didn't ask many questions. Trust had always been her weakness. She wanted to believe that someone finally had her best interests at heart. The truth revealed itself slowly, then all at once. One night she overheard a phone call. The words didn't make sense at first. Numbers, locations, warnings spoken in a tense, hurried voice. When Jason noticed her standing there, the look in his eyes changed. It wasn't anger. It was calculation. That was when Emily understood that she had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. What she had been pulled into wasn't just unethical. It was illegal. Dangerous. Fear settled deep in her chest, heavy and suffocating. She realized how carefully Jason had isolated her, how little she knew about the world outside of him. The realization hit harder than the betrayal itself. She had no family to turn to, no close friends who knew where she was. She belonged nowhere. That night, while Jason slept, Emily packed what little she had. A change of clothes, her phone, already low on battery, a small amount of cash she had hidden away without knowing why. Her hands shook the entire time. Every sound felt too loud. Every second felt borrowed. She left without a note. The night air was cold and unforgiving. Emily walked without direction, moving on instinct alone. Her heart raced with every passing car, every shadow that shifted behind her. She expected at any moment to hear her name called out, to feel a hand grab her arm and pull her back into the life she was trying to escape. But no one came. Hours passed. Her legs grew heavy. Her thoughts blurred together, fear mixing with exhaustion until she could no longer tell where one ended and the other began. Eventually, she collapsed on the side of a quiet road, her back against a cold guardrail. The world felt distant, muted, as if she were watching herself from far away. Emily had never felt so small. She didn't know how long she sat there. Time lost its meaning somewhere between panic and numbness. When headlights finally appeared in the distance, she barely had the strength to lift her head. The car slowed, then stopped. An elderly couple stepped out. They moved carefully, deliberately, as if the night itself demanded gentleness. The woman wore a coat that looked far too warm for the season, the kind chosen out of habit rather than necessity. The man stayed close beside her, his presence quiet but steady. They didn't bombard Emily with questions. They didn't demand explanations. They simply saw a young woman alone, trembling, clearly at the edge of collapse. That was enough. The ride to their home passed in silence. Emily stared out the window, watching the unfamiliar streets slide by. She expected judgment, suspicion, something sharp and invasive. Instead, she was met with calm, with patience, with an understanding that some stories are not meant to be told right away. The house was modest and well kept. Nothing about it stood out, and somehow that made it feel safer. Inside, the air was warm. The lights were soft. The woman introduced herself as Helen Wilson, her voice gentle and unhurried. Her husband, Robert, nodded quietly, offering a reassuring presence without pressing too close. Emily was given a blanket, a glass of water, a place to sit. No one asked where she had come from. No one asked why she was running. For the first time since leaving Jason, Emily allowed herself to breathe. That night, as she lay in a guest room that smelled faintly of laundry detergent and old books, sleep came in fragments. Her body was too tense, her mind too alert. But even in her half-conscious state, she was aware of something unfamiliar, settling over her, a sense of safety she hadn't realized she'd been missing. The Wilsons checked on her quietly, careful not to intrude. They treated her presence not as a burden, but as something natural, temporary, and worthy of care. Their kindness felt uncomplicated, almost foreign. It didn't ask for anything in return. Emily wondered why strangers would do this for her. She wondered if kindness without conditions truly existed, or if this too would reveal a hidden cost. Morning light filtered through the curtains, soft and pale. Emily woke slowly, her body sore, but her mind clearer than it had been in days. The panic had dulled, replaced by a cautious awareness of where she was. She was still afraid, still alone, still uncertain of what would come next. But she was alive. And for the first time since the night she ran, she wasn't running anymore. Morning arrived quietly in the Wilsons' house. The sunlight crept in through the curtains with a gentleness Emily was not used to, as if the day itself was careful not to frighten her away. For a moment after waking, she lay still, listening. There were no raised voices, no slamming doors, just the soft sounds of a lived-in home, footsteps moving slowly, a kettle heating somewhere in the distance. It felt temporary. Everything about it did. Emily dressed quickly, her movements automatic. She had already made her decision. Gratitude did not erase reality. She could not stay. Kindness, no matter how sincere, always came with limits. She had learned that early in life. Relying on strangers, even good ones, felt dangerous in its own way. She planned to thank them and leave, find the cheapest room she could afford, take whatever job would have her, keep her head down. That had always been her survival strategy. The Wilsons noticed immediately. They did not raise their voices or block her path. They simply slowed her down, the way people do when they want you to reconsider without forcing you to. They spoke calmly, not urgently, explaining that there was someone they knew, someone who might be a better fit for her situation. A woman who lived alone, someone quiet, someone kind. Emily listened without interrupting. She expected hesitation to rise inside her, but what surprised her was how tired she felt. Tired of deciding everything alone. Tired of always choosing the option that hurt less instead of the one that felt right. The name they mentioned meant nothing to her then. Margaret Carter. They spoke of her with familiarity, with trust. A longtime friend. A woman who had space, both in her home and in her life. a woman who did not ask too many questions. That last part stayed with Emily. Within the hour, they were on the road again. Emily sat in the back seat, watching the neighborhoods change, small houses giving way to quieter streets, trees lining, the sidewalks like silent witnesses. The fear she had carried since the night before had softened, though it had not disappeared. It rested just beneath the surface, ready to return. The house they stopped in front of was modest but well kept. Nothing extravagant, nothing intimidating. The kind of place that blended into its surroundings, unnoticed unless you were looking for it. Emily noticed how the windows were clean, how the porch steps showed signs of careful repair rather than neglect. Margaret Maggie Carter answered the door herself. She was neither overly warm nor distant. Her presence felt balanced, steady. There was no rush in her movements, no sharpness in her gaze. She looked at Emily the way someone looks at a person, not a problem to be solved. The introductions were brief, simple. Maggie did not study Emily too closely. She did not lean in with curiosity or suspicion. She opened the door wider and stepped aside, allowing Emily to enter without ceremony. Inside, the house felt lived in, but quiet, not lonely, intentional. There were framed photographs on the walls, but none recent. Books stacked neatly on shelves, a sense of order that suggested routine rather than control. Emily noticed these things instinctively. She had always been good at reading spaces. They often said more than people did. Maggie showed her the room she would stay in. It was small but clean, with a bed that looked rarely used and a window that let in afternoon light. Nothing in it felt temporary or rushed, as if the room had been waiting for someone without knowing who that someone would be. There were no questions about Emily's past, no demands for explanations. Maggie did not ask where she had come from or why she needed a place to stay. She simply explained the house rules, few and reasonable, and left Emily alone to settle in. That absence of pressure unsettled her more than interrogation ever could have. The first few days passed quietly. Emily moved through the house cautiously, careful not to take up too much space. She expected the moment when patience would thin, when expectations would surface. It never came. Maggie treated her presence as normal, not as an inconvenience or a favor. Meals were shared without ceremony, not elaborate, not rushed, just enough. Maggie cooked with an ease that suggested habit rather than performance. There was comfort in the predictability of it, in the way evenings followed a rhythm Emily had never known. Conversation remained light, practical. Maggie asked about Emily's interests, not her history, what she liked, what she was good at, what kind of work she thought she could handle. These questions felt forward-looking, focused on what could be built rather than what had been lost. Emily remained guarded. Trust did not come easily, and she did not offer it freely. But slowly, almost against her will, her shoulders relaxed. She slept more deeply. She ate without feeling the need to rush. The constant alertness that had defined her life began to fade. When Maggie mentioned a job opportunity, a friend of a friend needing help, something stable and legal, Emily hesitated. She waited for the catch. There wasn't one. Maggie made no promises, only suggestions. The decision was left entirely to her. That choice mattered more than Emily realized at the time. She took the job. With work came structure. With structure came a sense of forward motion. Emily began to believe, cautiously, that this chapter of her life might not end the way the others had. She returned home each day to a house that felt consistent, to a presence that did not fluctuate based on mood or expectation. Sometimes, late at night, she found herself listening to the quiet of the house, trying to understand why it felt so unfamiliar, why being cared for without conditions felt unsettling instead of comforting. She told herself it was temporary. Everything always was. Maggie never contradicted that assumption. Weeks passed, then more. The house did not change. Neither did Maggie's demeanor. She remained attentive without being intrusive, supportive without being possessive. If she noticed Emily's lingering hesitations, she did not comment on them. The Wilsons visited occasionally. Their presence reinforced the sense that this arrangement was not accidental, that there was a network here, quiet and dependable, holding things together without demanding acknowledgement. Emily began to feel something she had not allowed herself to feel in years: belonging. It frightened her, because belonging meant attachment, and attachment meant vulnerability. And vulnerability had always led to loss. Still, she stayed. And without realizing it, Emily began to imagine a future that did not involve running. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that a life could be rebuilt slowly, carefully, with people who did not need to know her past in order to offer her a place in their present. She did not know then that this calm was temporary, only that, for now, she was safe. For a while, Emily allowed herself to believe that the past had loosened its grip on her. Her days followed a simple pattern now. Work ended at the same hour. The walk home traced familiar streets. Maggie's house waited at the end of it all, unchanged and predictable. Emily told herself that routine was safety, and safety was something she had earned. That illusion shattered on an ordinary afternoon. She was halfway down the block, her mind already shifting toward the quiet of the evening, when she felt it, a sensation she had learned to trust long before she could explain it. The sudden awareness of being watched, the tightening in her chest, the instinct to look up. Across the street, standing near a parked car, was Jason Miller. He did not approach her. He did not call her name. He simply stood there, as if he had always known she would pass by at that exact moment. His posture was relaxed, almost casual, but his eyes were sharp, measuring, familiar in a way that made her stomach twist. Time slowed. Emily kept walking, forcing her body to obey, even as panic surged through her. She did not look back again. She did not run. Running would confirm something she was not ready to face, that he still had power over her. But her hands shook all the same. By the time she reached Maggie's house, the calm she had built so carefully had collapsed. The front door closed behind her with a finality that made her chest ache. The safety she had come to rely on suddenly felt fragile, as if it could be taken away with one wrong move. Emily told Maggie everything. The words spilled out faster than she intended. The sighting, the fear, the certainty that Jason had not found her by accident. She expected concern, sympathy. What she did not expect was the change that came over Maggie's face. The color drained from her skin. Her movements grew restless, her hands tightening and releasing as if searching for something to hold on to. It was not the reaction of someone surprised by danger. It was the reaction of someone who recognized it. That realization unsettled Emily more than Jason's appearance had. Maggie did not hesitate. That night, she insisted that Emily stop going to work. The outside world, she said, was no longer safe. There was an urgency in her tone that left no room for argument, though she was careful not to raise her voice. She assured Emily that everything would be taken care of, that money was not a concern, that food and shelter were guaranteed. Emily listened, torn between relief and discomfort. Part of her wanted to argue, to insist on independence, to reject what felt like retreat. But another part of her, the part that remembered running through the night, heart pounding, nowhere to go, recognized the wisdom in staying hidden. She agreed. The house changed after that. The doors were locked earlier in the evening. The curtains were drawn before dusk. Maggie checked the windows more than once, her movements, precise and practiced. She did not explain these precautions, and Emily did not ask. The silence between them grew heavier, filled with questions neither of them seemed willing to voice. Days passed. Emily stayed inside. At first, the quiet felt like relief. Her body welcomed the rest, the chance to slow down. But as the hours stretched on, unease crept in. The house, once comforting, began to feel too still, too watchful. To occupy herself, Emily cleaned. She started with the obvious spaces, the kitchen, the living room, the guest room she had made her own. Then she moved deeper into the house, wiping down surfaces, organizing shelves, anything to keep her hands busy and her thoughts at bay. That was when she noticed the door. It was at the end of a narrow hallway, set apart from the rest of the rooms. Unlike the others, it was always closed, always locked. Emily realized she had never seen Maggie open it, not once since she had arrived. At first, she dismissed the thought. Everyone had private spaces, closets filled with things better left untouched, old habits she did not need to understand. But the longer she stayed in the house, the more that door drew her attention. There was something deliberate about it, something guarded. Emily tried not to think about it. She focused instead on routine, on preparing meals, on keeping the house orderly. She avoided the windows, avoided the front porch, avoided any reminder that the world outside continued to exist. Still, the sense of being watched did not fade. At night, she dreamed of footsteps, of doors opening behind her, of voices she could not place. She woke with her heart racing, the room unfamiliar in the dark. Maggie remained attentive but distant. She checked on Emily often, making sure she was comfortable, making sure she ate. But there was a tension beneath her calm, an edge that had not been there before Jason's reappearance. Emily noticed it in the way Maggie listened for sounds outside, in the way she paused before answering simple questions, in the way her gaze lingered on Emily, as if searching for something she could not name. One afternoon, while Maggie was out running errands, Emily found herself standing in the hallway again. The door at the end seemed closer than before. She did not intend to open it. At least, that was what she told herself. Curiosity had always been a quiet force in her life, rarely acknowledged but impossible to suppress. She told herself she was simply cleaning, simply being helpful. Her hand brushed against the doorknob. It turned. Emily froze. The lock had been disengaged. For a moment she stood perfectly still, her pulse pounding in her ears. The house was silent. No footsteps, no voices. Nothing to suggest she was being watched. Slowly she pushed the door open. The room beyond was dim, the air cooler than the rest of the house. Boxes lined the walls, stacked neatly, deliberately. The smell of cardboard and dust filled her senses. Emily stepped inside. She did not know yet that she had crossed a threshold she could not step back from, only that something about this room felt preserved, untouched, as if it held pieces of a life that had been paused rather than ended. The door closed softly behind her, and the past, long buried, waited in the shadows. The storage room felt colder than the rest of the house. Emily stood just inside the doorway, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. The air was still, heavy with the faint scent of cardboard and time. Nothing in the room looked abandoned. On the contrary, everything had been arranged with care. Boxes were stacked neatly along the walls, each one sealed, labeled, and untouched. She took a step forward, then another. Her footsteps sounded too loud in the silence, as if the room itself were listening. Emily moved slowly, her unease growing with every box she passed. They were all the same size, the same color, as if purchased together and stored away with a single purpose. Children's toys. The realization settled into her chest with a dull weight. She had not expected this, not here, not in Maggie's house. There were too many boxes for coincidence, too many for casual storage. They represented something deliberate, something saved. Emily crouched and brushed her fingers over one of the boxes. The tape was intact, the cardboard unbent. Whatever was inside had never been opened. A sense of loss washed over her, sharp and unexpected. She could not yet explain it, only feel it. Near the back of the room, separated from the rest, sat a small wooden shelf. It held only a few items placed with intention rather than convenience. Emily's gaze locked onto one object immediately: a doll. It was old, its fabric worn smooth with age. The hair was slightly matted, the dress faded but clean. It did not belong with the unopened boxes. It had been handled, loved. Emily felt a tightening in her throat. She could not remember where she had seen it before, only that the sight of it stirred something deep and painful inside her. Her body reacted before her mind could catch up. Her hands trembled as she reached for it. The doll was heavier than she expected. As she lifted it, her thumb brushed against a small button hidden beneath the fabric. The sound that followed broke the silence of the room. A soft, recorded voice filled the air. "Good night, my daughter. Mommy loves you." Emily froze. The words echoed through her, bypassing reason entirely. Her breath caught, sharp and shallow. The voice was gentle, familiar. It carried a warmth that made her chest ache. Images surfaced uninvited, fragmented and incomplete. A darkened room, a bed too big for a small body, the sound of breathing nearby, the feeling of being held, safe and protected. Her knees weakened. Emily lowered herself to the floor, the doll still clutched in her hands. Her mind raced, searching for explanations, for logic that could undo what she was feeling. But memory is not logical. It arrives on its own terms. Her eyes scanned the room again, more urgently now. That was when she saw the photograph. It was tucked inside a thin frame, placed carefully behind the shelf, as if hidden in plain sight. Emily reached for it with shaking fingers. The photo was old. The colors faded, the edges slightly curled. It showed a young girl, no more than 4 or 5 years old, standing awkwardly in front of a familiar house. The girl was holding the doll. She was smiling. Standing beside her, one arm protectively around her small shoulders, was Maggie. Emily stared at the image, her mind struggling to reject what her eyes were telling her. The child in the photo was unmistakable. The shape of the face, the posture, the doll held close to her chest. It was her. The room seemed to tilt. Everything Emily had built inside herself, every story she had told herself about abandonment, about being unwanted, collapsed at once. The woman who had opened her home without hesitation, who had cooked for her, protected her, hidden her when danger returned. Margaret Maggie Carter was not a stranger. She was her mother. The truth landed with devastating force. Emily's thoughts spiraled, tumbling over one another in a frantic search for meaning. If Maggie was her mother, then every act of kindness carried a different weight. Every quiet meal, every concerned glance, every moment of patience, and every moment of silence. The pain sharpened into anger. Emily's chest burned as a familiar wound reopened, deeper and more brutal than before. She had spent her life believing she had been left behind, that her mother had chosen absence, that she had not been enough to stay for. Now she knew Maggie had known all along. The betrayal cut clean and precise. Emily stood abruptly, the doll slipping from her grasp and landing softly on the floor. She did not look at it again. She did not look back at the photo. The room felt suffocating now, filled with too many unanswered questions and too much withheld truth. She left the storage room without closing the door. The house felt different as she moved through it, every familiar corner suddenly foreign. The safety she had felt there shattered, replaced by the raw realization that she had been living inside a lie, one constructed with care, but a lie nonetheless. Maggie was not home yet. Emily did not wait. She gathered her things quickly, her movements sharp and efficient. There was no time for hesitation, no space for conversation. Any explanation offered now would only deepen the damage. She stepped outside, the cool air hitting her face like a shock. As she walked away from the house, Emily felt the weight of her decision settle in. She did not know where she was going. She only knew she could not stay. Not now, not with the truth pressing against her from every direction. Anger carried her forward. So did grief. Behind her, the house remained silent, its doors closed, its secrets finally exposed. Ahead of her lay uncertainty, fear, and the familiar ache of being alone. But this time, the loneliness carried a different shape. It was no longer rooted in absence. It was rooted in loss. Emily did not look back. Emily did not know how long she walked. The streets blurred together, unfamiliar and endless. Her thoughts moved faster than her body, replaying images she could not erase. The storage room, the doll, the photograph. The truth followed her like a shadow, refusing to be outrun. She had believed betrayal was something inflicted from the outside, something done by people who never truly loved you. Now she understood how deeply it could cut when it came wrapped in care and silence. By the time Jason Miller found her, exhaustion had replaced anger. He appeared where she least expected him, his presence as unwelcome as it was inevitable. He spoke softly at first, his voice carrying the practiced tone of regret. He framed his actions as mistakes, as misunderstandings, as consequences of circumstances beyond his control. Emily listened without responding. She had heard this version of him before, the one who knew exactly how to sound remorseful without ever taking responsibility. When his words failed to move her, the tone shifted, the sweetness hardened. He reminded her, subtly at first, that escape was an illusion, that the past had a way of circling back, that she was not as free as she believed. Fear stirred, familiar and sharp, but something inside Emily had changed. She no longer felt small in his presence. She no longer felt responsible for managing his emotions or absorbing his threats. The weight she had carried for so long, of appeasement, of silence, began to lift. She made a decision. Emily went to the police. The process was slow and emotionally draining. She recounted events she had tried desperately to forget. Each detail spoken aloud made the truth more solid, more real. Jason's influence weakened with every statement she gave, with every record filed. The hold he once had over her dissolved, replaced by something steadier: control. When she stepped out of the station, the air felt different, lighter, not because the pain was gone, but because it no longer defined her choices. It was not long after that when Robert and Helen Wilson found her. They approached carefully, the way they always had, as if aware that too much urgency might send her running again. Their faces carried concern, but also understanding. They did not pressure her. They did not accuse her of cruelty or ingratitude. Maggie stood behind them. She looked smaller somehow, older. The strength Emily had once admired in her now seemed worn down by regret and fear. Maggie did not reach for her. She did not speak immediately. Her silence was heavy, full of words she had waited too long to say. Emily felt the familiar pull, the desire to step back into safety, into the life she had almost accepted as her own. But she did not move. Some wounds could not be closed simply by returning to where they had been opened. Emily made another decision that day. She did not go back with Maggie. She did not explain herself. She did not argue. She simply left, disappeared, cut contact, changed cities, changed routines, built distance where closeness had once seemed inevitable. She began again. The life Emily created afterward was quiet, intentional and entirely her own. She worked steadily. She made acquaintances before allowing friendships. She learned how to exist without waiting for abandonment. Healing was not dramatic or fast. It arrived slowly, in moments she barely noticed at first. Years passed. Time softened some memories while sharpening others. The past did not vanish, but it loosened its grip. Emily learned to live with unanswered questions, believing that some truths would remain unresolved. Then the Wilsons found her again. They looked older now, more fragile. Their presence carried a gravity that told Emily the news before they spoke it. Margaret, Maggie. Carter was gone. She had died quietly, carrying with her the weight of things left unsaid. The Wilsons told Emily everything. Years ago, Maggie had not abandoned her child. She had been separated from her by a man who knew exactly how to erase her from her daughter's life. The search that followed had lasted years, driven by desperation and guilt. When Maggie finally found Emily again as an adult, recognition had come instantly. Fear followed just as quickly. Maggie had seen the damage Emily carried. She had learned about Jason, about betrayal, about how easily trust could be destroyed. Maggie believed that revealing the truth would push Emily away forever. That love, offered quietly and without explanation, was safer than honesty that arrived too late. It was a mistake. Emily listened without interrupting. Grief rose slowly, heavy and inevitable. Not the sharp pain of loss, but the dull ache of understanding that clarity had come too late to change anything. Maggie's love had been real. Her silence had been fatal. Emily returned to the house one final time. It stood exactly as she remembered it, unchanged by the years. Inside, the quiet was profound. She moved through the rooms slowly, each step echoing with memories that no longer hurt as sharply as they once had. In the storage room, the doll waited. Emily picked it up carefully, pressing it close. The recorded voice played again, unchanged by time. Simple, loving, permanent in a way nothing else had been. She closed the door behind her and sat on the floor. There were no words left to say. Emily cried for the mother she had lost twice, for the child she had been, for the years that could not be reclaimed. She cried for the truth that arrived when forgiveness was no longer possible. When she finally stood, the tears had stopped. The pain remained, but it was different now. Quieter, integrated. Emily left the house knowing she would carry this story with her for the rest of her life. Not as a burden, but as a reminder that love, when hidden, can become another form of loss, and that choosing oneself, even when it hurts, is sometimes the only way forward. She closed the door gently behind her. This time, she did not run. She walked away.